So, Jason, here we are. Flip mode, I'm calling this. So, on this 100th episode of Hub and Spoken, your podcast for data leaders and interested professionals, we're switching roles. Your first episode, 001, I was in the hot seat, you were interviewing me. Now, 3.5 years later, we're at 100, and I'm flipping the roles, putting you in the hot seat this time.
Yeah, this is very uncomfortable. Not used to this.
No, it's going to be weird for me as well, but let's go with it and see how it works out. So, it's really interesting, I think, 3.5 years since we last talked, and I wonder what else has flipped, changed, or stayed the same over the 3.5 years since we first did a podcast together. So I don't know if you know, but you published our previous chat on the role of the CDO on Valentine's Day 2018.
I did know that, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I did know that.
It was a unique piece of data that I found. We've known each other for some years before then, so I know that your romance with data is as deep as mine. Let's get into it. And
Let's do it. Let's do it, mate. Let's do it.
Right, number one. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the podcast? When you started, there weren't many of these around, but now there are hundreds. They're absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
So what did you hope to achieve, and do you think you've nailed the objectives you had for it?
Yeah, it is interesting. When we did start, we started because we looked around and to see what kind of content was out there, audio format, which was sort of up and coming, and there was technical podcasts about technology, about data science, but there was nothing that was kind of open, accessible, about business and business outcomes around data. So it was all kind of much more of a technical focus, and we wanted to create something that sort of really kind of gave insight and intel into what's actually happening in organizations, in industry. What are people doing? What are they trying? Where are they making mistakes? We want it to be a little bit warts and all, and open up the conversation. And we use the word accessible. I think right at the start. In fact, I think you and I had a conversation about, does it go as far as, this should be something about data that kids could listen to? Now we leveled at kind of corporate and organizations and industry in the end, but yeah, I think we've done an okay job of that, and we've always tried to bring guests into the podcast that aren't necessarily kind of on stage speakers, but they're people that are in organizations, hidden away, doing some amazing things. So we've exposed some really awesome stuff that people are doing and the problems they've had, and that people can learn from it. So that's what we wanted to try and achieve, a kind of an accessible, business focused kind of series.
And certainly, judging by how successful you've been, I mean, you've done 99 apart from me.
That's right, yeah.
Then, I think that's deeply impressive. You must have hit the mark. And I think, like so many times in, the time that we've known each other, you're slightly ahead of the curve. So, credit to you.
Well, we wanted to be consistent as well. We started off fairly irregularly with releasing them. We're now at one a week. But the idea was just to be consistent, keep going with it, keep putting out some good content, change it up. And yeah, that's what we've tried to do.
So how wide does it go then?
Well, we've got we're 100 episodes to this one. We're in I think it's 126 countries.
Wow.
Something like 100 different podcast platforms. Sort of, I think when you tot it up in terms of the number of downloads and the amount of minutes on each episode, we're at like 2 million minutes of download. So it's gone quite wide. We're when you think about what's 126 countries, it's something like 60-70% of all countries have had a listen. It's quite astounding when I think about it.
Yeah, it's the impact you're having on the industry. Well done. You don't translate it at all. It's all English format, I guess.
Yeah, it's English format. We blog we write a blog for each of the episodes now, and that's in English format, so it's accessible for English speaking.
Very nice. And did you start one in the USA, or is that part of the same series?
Yeah, it's part of the same series. We about 12-18 months ago, we opened out who we brought into the show to a slightly more global audience, and that was to reflect the slightly more global nature of the business that I run, and that's attracted more of a global audience. I think something like 50% of all downloads are in the US actually of the whole podcast. That more US guests, more US listeners, but no specific sort of center there. We just run the podcast as an audio format, and anyone can listen.
Fantastic. And I must ask this question: what's your most downloaded episode?
That's interesting you asked that. I think you might know the answer as well. So there's one episode that has consistently remained in at least the top 2 since it was recorded. It's sometimes dropped to second, but 90% of the time it's at number 1, and that was your episode, Pete. episode number 1, and I think you knew that.
It's
So thanks for steering me
I'd
to
like to
it.
check in on
Yeah.
that every now and then to make sure I haven't lost my position. But our chat was around the role of the chief
Yeah.
data officer, and this never goes away in our industry. So,
More than it doesn't go away, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this a bit more. It's become more relevant.
yeah.
So the fact that it's the title is the role of the chief data officer is no sort of fluffing it up. That's what it's about.
Absolutely.
And it was a great chat.
So let's move on a bit. So the podcast has been a great success, and do you think that's been mirrored in the growth of the business you created?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know which way around it is. If the podcast helped drive the business growth, or the business has helped drive the podcast growth. There's probably some attribution modelling in there to do somewhere, but yeah, I think Cynozure, the business I run, has steadily grown. That's rapidly grown, really, over the last sort of 5 years, and so yeah, that does mirror the growth of the podcast. But I think that's both the growth of the podcast and the business is reflective of the growth of the need and demand for data, and organisations sort of wrap their arms around this problem and figure out how they make better decisions through data, and we've been luckily very fortunate, well positioned as the market has sort of embraced it a bit more, that we're sort of well positioned to help organisations do that. So yeah, they're aligned. The growth trajectory is aligned, and very pleased for it.
Yeah, done a great job. Let's just dive into your organisation just a little bit before we move on to the more generic questions around data. So what are your driving principles? I mean, for instance, I know that when we started talking a long time ago, when you started the organisation, you talked a lot about being practitioner-led, which I really like the concept of, and I think it resonates. So what else matters to you? What sets you apart?
Well, I think that I'll touch on that practitioner-led thing first, because I think what's important in any change, and most of what you need to do with data is touches on change in some way, change in process, change in people, change in approach, change in thinking, change in the level of innovation, all this sort of stuff. And I find that the people that are able to most empathize with that change problem are people that have been in industry and done it. So the organization's made up of a bunch of practitioners that have been in industry. They've tried to get budgets approved. They've tried to, implement and implement data strategies. They've passed very well at that. They've failed in some respects in it. So they've got scars. They know, they understand. So that's at the forefront of how we approach this. It's practitioners that have been there, done it. They can empathize with our customers. They can empathize with the problems and the challenges they've got, and therefore hopefully create a better, more practical and pragmatic answer to how you go about this. But I think the other stuff is all about being authentic with this, about being open, honest, transparent with the way we do things. We want to be there for the industry, for the community, for customers, and we want to focus on turning business outcomes, and that's what we're sort of all about and focus on. So yes, capabilities, yes, the cool technology, yes, data science and machine learning and all this cool stuff, but actually it's about delivering incremental business outcome by applying data. So we sort of mash all that together, and that's we look for people to work with in the business. We look for customers that sort of share that value, share that chemistry, and that's when it works really nicely.
I know that years ago we were involved in some data for good type hackathons, which I think were really exciting and powerful. Is that the same sort of philosophy you're carrying on? You're still involved in that sort of third sector work?
Yeah, so our purpose, actually, the sort of statement we have is to create a better future for all through the open and positive use of data, and it's all about there's a root here which is dystopian, and data's used for bad, and it's weaponized, and we see some of that already in social media, how data's sort of turned back against people with elections and all this sort of thing. That's one unhappy path, I think, and there's a very happy path, which is we use data to drive improvement in society and the things that we do, and the way people work and the way they operate, and some really big problems that can be solved with data. So yes, that's like fundamental to everything we do, and we do a bunch of work in private and public sector. Obviously private sector is mostly commercial, but public sector, love it, 'cause it's all about society and improving our lives and the way we do things. And the third, not-for-profit, and third sector is all about, charities, if you think about it, are all about creating better future for people and today's and future. So we love working with the third sector and not-for-profits, because it helps us to, satisfy our purpose and support the greater agenda. And we like, so whichever industry, we're all about how do we create an open use of data, but, better future is what we're all about.
Yeah. And I'll give a quick shout out to DataKind UK, who we worked with in those early podcasts, and I think are a fantastic organisation. And I know many others have sprung up since using data science for good. So just a quick plug there. So let's move on a little bit. So over the last 3.5 years, have the questions changed? So when somebody engages you, are they still typically looking for the same thing as they were back when we started having this conversation? Or has the nature of the demand evolved as the industry has become, I guess, more mature?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. That the underlying thing that has never really changed in not what necessarily the question that people are asking, but really the thing that people need to achieve is improvement in. I sort of talked about this already. Improvement in business outcomes, an improvement in the return they give to their shareholders or their stakeholders, the return the lives they make better for their staff and employees. So what you're trying to achieve is a better understanding of the organisation, the performance of the organisation, and how we can improve and evolve it. Well, I think what's changed is people's understanding of that there's a use for data in helping to do that, and that it's an imperative rather than a nice to have. And whilst when you get under it, that imperative becomes, okay, we want to understand this, we need to understand the return, the costs involved, but the imperative of using data is way more understood. So 20 years ago, a bit longer, when I first sort of started in data, it was you really had to convince people that data was even a concept that they should be considering and not just something in sort of technology and in systems. Now people get that, and it's about how do we make it happen? What process, what thinking, what ways of setting ourselves up do we need to put in place in order to maximise the opportunity and satisfy the demand? So I think that what's really changed is the pace and the expectation that people can get from data. The outcome people are trying to achieve, I don't think that's necessarily changed a huge amount.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that, from my own personal story, when I'm being asked to present on things and when I go into organizations and talk about data opportunities, the thing that I always feel is I class myself as a Gen 1 CDO, using the sort of terms defined by, Caroline Carruthers and Peter Jackson in their book, because I love that fight, the analog to digital fight, the enlightening of people when that starts to happen. And I always worry that story is kind of not needed anymore, because surely everybody started on this journey, and yet every time I talk to people and saying this message is kind of done now, what do we do next, there are so many organizations who know they need to start this journey and just haven't done so. No,
it's true, but plenty of people haven't. And well, I say that, I mean, people are doing data without realizing it, so everyone's on the journey in some respects, but those that have consciously gone, right, we're going to define our approach, our strategy, and try and really add value, that's what people are sort of coming to and coming back to. I mean, I'm not so bought into the whole kind of generation 1, 2, or 3 per se, because I think the objective has always been the same, which is deliver value out of exploiting and using data. That's always been there. I think what's different is that there's a recognition that it has to be about delivering some either small change or transformational change, depending on the nature of the business challenges that an organization has. So I think that hasn't changed. I think what you're referring to is like there is some work to do to get an organization clear, bought into and understanding what this thing's all about. And some organizations need that, and some organizations have already got that, and they're trying to sort of iterate and move the agenda forward a little bit more. But there are plenty, I mean, don't worry, mate, there are plenty of companies that are at the start of that kind of, right, let's reset, let's really understand this, let's see what value it can add, and let's put the capabilities in place to let us do it.
I think you made a really useful delineation there, because people always say, "Oh, we're not using data," but you're absolutely right. Every business decision is based on data. Whether you consciously think about that or not, it's the conscious decision to structure your organization around creating and using that.
Exactly.
That's really the journey we're talking about.
Exactly. It turns it from, a hygiene factor, I guess, to a really powerful, superpower to the business. That's the difference. How do you consciously change rather than it just being something that's there?
I think that's right. And this leads into my next question, which really, I've always, and the nature of our first podcast was the role that best enables that to happen is the chief data officer, the CDO. So have you seen that become a more accepted role over the 3.5 years? Because I think when we first talked, it was quite rare and unusual, and you were trying to convince people that this was a real job.
Data leadership, the role of someone who's able to define the strategy for getting the most out of data, and the one who's responsible for making it happen, that has definitely transformed. There's way more people who are in that position. Some are called chief data officer, some are called heads of data, some are analytics leads, some are business intelligence managers. The role is quite varied in terms of the position of in the organization, but that role of someone who's responsible for defining what this means to the business and making it happen. That has transformed. There wasn't many people of those before, and there's now lots. I think that the level of seniority is where this conversation about chief data officer or not comes in, because it's how much credence and how much appetite does an organization have to make this a really important component of the business, I think determines where they sit, where this role sits. And it's still quite low overall, the true sort of C-level data leaders in organizations. That has changed a bit, but not. I don't think that's transformed. Certainly in some sectors that's true more than others. But yeah, like more data leadership, more people thinking about this, more people trying to wrap their arms around it. Whether it needs to be the CDO or not is a debate that will run forever. It's a nuance. It depends, and all that good stuff. So, but yeah, I think that's changed in terms of how many people have got that focus on making this happen.
I'm pretty sure when we started, this conversation, you wouldn't have found 99 other people to talk about this.
No,
but
no, that's very true.
More than
that's very true. I mean, they've not all been chief data officers or data leaders, but yeah, they're just the volume of people that are now able to converse and about what they've done and what they've tried and what's worked and what hasn't. There's just way more of that about, for sure.
I've often thought that the C-suite is a defined set of roles. It doesn't vary that much. Other people come and go, but you've always got the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the CIO, and they all seem to have some sort of structured career path. And the CDO is quite a new starter. Doesn't really come with like an established accreditation or anything like that. I guess a part of it is a belief in you as an individual, and other parts are around your experience, your change management, how you can express that, and whether people buy into the journey, give you sponsorship. Have you seen any sort of moves around trying to provide anything a bit more formalized around what this role really means?
Yeah, I think lots of great people are contributing to that debate, actually. I mean, we run the Chief Data Officer Hub, the CDO Hub, which is about helping to better define what modern and world-class data leadership looks like. There is no accreditation like a CIMA for financial services or sorry, accountancy and the finance industry in data. There's some pockets that are starting to be developed, but it's a business leadership role, and the fundamentals of a good chief data officer are about things that aren't actually related to data. They're about management, they're about influence, they're about selling, they're about influencing negotiation, building teams. These are all general leadership skills that are needed in order to be successful in any leadership position in a business. But it has it's like a t-shirt. It has a lens on data rather than a lens on marketing or a lens on finance. So I think in some respects it's kind of why there's such a varied background in who becomes a CDO, because the route to it is not defined. There is no, you don't have that accreditation, exactly. and lots of different type of people can be successful at it. I think it's quite exciting, actually. It's sort of not general. It's just exciting that lots of people have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think some of the most exciting data teams are the ones that aren't just technicians. You've got people really interested in psychology and consumer behavior and history and how does community adapt, and all of those things are driven around how the data's being used and the impact it can have. But that's when it gets really exciting.
Totally. And I think that very much depends on the kind of organization you're in, who else is on the C-suite, what the biggest opportunity is, and the type of culture that you have. All of that will shape and define the level of seniority, but also the type of person and background you need, and that will change. So day one, as you talked about, you love the kind of roll up the sleeves, get people to understand what this means, get the buy-in. That's quite a different set of capabilities it is to someone who has all of that and has data platform already built. And actually this is like fine-tuning operations in the business to deliver value. That's quite a different type of character, actually. And individuals can do both, but you might need to sort of a bit of a brain shift depending on what sort of stage of maturity you're at.
Have you got a view, and has this changed over time, about where the CDO should sit? A thorny old conversation, this one. Many a drunken nights over beers at a CDO conference, but where do you think he should sit?
So I've got two. My fence-sitting answer actually is, in one hand, it doesn't matter. On one hand, as long as you have someone who is responsible to define the agenda and responsible for making it happen, and given the freedom and that they need in order to make that happen, I don't think it matters where they sit. However, in other respects, it matters a lot, because in most businesses, where something lives, it dictates the priority it gets, the budget it gets, the priorities that it of the work that's done within it. So I think it's about getting that balance right of put it where it makes most sense for if it's not on the board, right? Yeah. That's when it matters. When it's not on the board, where does
obviously
it sit?
Where it should be.
Yes, quite. Yeah. So I think it depends. Sorry if that's a bit of a fence-sitting answer, but what we try and do when we help answer that question for an individual company is work out what's the most relevant place for it to be in order to deliver the most value quickest.
Yeah,
that's what's needed.
This is the key part for me, because I think a mature and adopted data function has commercial objectives and KPIs against it.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily start with that point. But, all of data is about leveraging your asset to drive performance.
Yeah.
And I think as you become embedded in an organization, you should have some expectation you're either driving revenue, controlling costs, saving man hours or FTE,
totally
establishing something else, and measures against you should therefore be relevant.
I agree. If you're just about building the capability, definitely needed. But if you're just about building capability, then there's a real danger, and it doesn't always happen, of course, but there's a real danger that you become a cost center that doesn't add value.
Once you're capable, you're shut down. What's next?
Yes. You've got the skills, you've got the talent, but so without turning that into sort of some return, and it can take a while to build capability, and the danger that what we see often is the buy-in that gets achieved, and then focus is put on sort of let's build this capability, which can take time, 1, 2, 3 years. If after 2, 3 years what you've done is build capability and not deliver value, you've got, then the questions start asking, and if there's cost pressures, that it's an obvious place to look. So I think the focus on value needs to start at day one, not at year 2. And you build capability in line with delivering value, rather than try and get the capability first and then think about what we're going to do with it. That's most important.
I think that leads into a conversation around what are the characteristics that a data leader, CDO or whatever, has to have. And I think your point around how long it takes to become stable and mature, capable, is really important, because any message that's got a 3-year lifespan inside an organization can become quite stagnant, and is always at risk of being compromised by business environment, economics. Look at COVID, for instance. So one of the skills of the data leader is evangelism, I think, to be able to have the momentum and the engagement to keep that conversation going. So, I mean, if that's one skill, you may or may not agree, but what other skills do you think, are they still relevant and the same as they were years ago?
Evangelism, totally. We'll call it. There's other names for it, but essentially being able to position, champion and position the role that data can play and should play in the business. There's definitely there's a sort of change agent type role. That's definitely needed, and it continues to be needed. And the challenge, as you say, the challenge is business doesn't stand still. So the nature of that change, the nature of the message needs to adjust and pivot around what's happening in the organization. It can't be what you were saying 3 years ago. It needs to be saying what's relevant now. So totally agree with that. So I think being a change agent is important. I think being able to tell a story is really important. I think being able to find good people and attract good people and build great teams is critical. This isn't a one-person job. This is a team sport, to borrow a phrase. I think influence up. I mean, this is slightly linked with change, but influence to the board, whether that's up or to your peers, depending on where it sits, but also a sort of a broad network of influence across the organisation. Because typically, because data is a horizontal, typically it's sort of essentially treading on lots of people's toes in some ways. If you talk about even privacy and security, that dips into the CISO. If you're talking about delivering value into customer acquisition, that sits with customer and marketing. So you're always collaborating, and that skill of collaboration and cooperation is, I think, probably after kind of that change skill, I think is probably up there as a top few that's needed. Because if you're sort of ivory tower or very siloed, you break the problem. You don't break the problem, you create more of a problem. So I think collaboration is probably my top one.
I think these are the skills that mark out leaders of any function. The ability to influence and manage stakeholders and understand the commercial pressures and the opportunities for everybody. And I think that's why I don't think the CDO needs to have a deep technical capability. They can't be bluffed.
Yep.
They need to be competent, but it's more about being an influential leader with a knowledge around data and the ability to adapt your message, rather than being a deep technical expert. And that's, you're an engineering dude.
And yes, I agree. I think 9 times out of 10, there's certainly organisations where having a technical leader is relevant. If you're in a very technical digital business where your product is tech, then of course that makes sense. In the majority of organisations where you're delivering sort of some combination of physical and digital products to organisations, you tend to need a broader skill set. And I think when people go to market for a senior data leader, they're often, there'll be people who are able to kind of articulate the challenges in the recruitment industry about this, but it tends to be people can get quite confused about what they need. Do they need a business leader? Do they need someone who knows data? Do they need someone who knows AI? And that can get very confused. So being clear on what you're trying to achieve and putting someone in place that can achieve that is actually what you need to do.
There are some great LinkedIn threads on the comedy job descriptions
Yeah.
for a data leader, which I always like to engage with. Let's not do that here, but go and seek them out. I think it's always worth a look. And it leads me on to our next question. So when you're engaged, as Cynozure coming into a company, are you typically engaged by a data leader, or are you engaged by a board that's looking to become data literate and needs the sort of boost that your practitioner-led organization can provide?
Yeah, there's a bit of a mix. So there's a mix of data leader who is kind of essentially CDO. There's a business leader who is responsible for data in some way, shape, or form. So if you've got someone in marketing who's trying to influence the way data is used, that we're often brought in there. Technology, so CIO, CTO, who knows there's some opportunity in the organization, but hasn't been able to kind of cross that bridge and connect and collaborate with the business to sort of define what this should look like. And indeed, leadership teams, whether that's board or senior leadership team, who are saying there's some real opportunity here. We don't think we're doing the right things, so let's sort of get on this. It's sort of almost the challenge in this space is who is responsible when there is no one yet responsible for it. So it's a real mix. There's no single sort of individual role that owns this. So therefore it tends to be a bit of a mix.
Well, let's just hope they keep knocking on the door, whatever role they come from.
Indeed, absolutely.
So just looking back again, so 3.5 years ago, Valentine's Day. So back in that first podcast, I said, somewhat rashly, the role of the CDO could be a fleeting one, because as the entire workforce becomes literate and data management has been sorted out, everybody's like a mini CDO. And I'm hoping I'm wrong, because I've got another 10 or 15 years to serve in this industry, so let's not let that happen. But I've also poked a bit of fun at the data scientist role before, because I don't think there's a vast proportion of them that are actually doing science, in a proper hypothesis-based, testing method-driven model, as opposed to stringing together a bunch of libraries that somebody else might have written. I'm not sure I regard that as true data science. So are there any other roles that you think are overhyped or on the route to being commoditized out by solution-focused services that kind of replace lots of those early engineering roles that we've now established are fundamental to getting data started, but don't require you to sit down and bash code out all the time?
Well, I will say it's why I love you, that you say it how you feel. You say what you feel.
I'll dig my own grave.
You don't dig your own grave, depending on how you look at it. And I do think there is a path here where the CDO is fleeting, and what's fleeting depends on the time frame that you're looking at. So that could be a 50-year fleet, or it could be a year fleet. But in an organisation where data is in the DNA of the organisation, and it's in the psyche, it's just used to make decisions, and everyone gets and understands that, it changes the nature of a kind of a data leader that you need, and might not even need one at all. And it might be someone that's more focused on monetizing externally the data, and that might not be a data leader, that might be a commercial leader. So
growth officer or something.
But exactly. So I think that there is a path in some organizations where it's not needed, because it sort of a lot of the work is either done already, or just through the way the organization, particularly in sort of digital native and data native businesses, it becomes less relevant. But I think I don't know if there's specific roles I could call out that are going to go away in this space, but there's definitely, and it's largely driven by, I think, technology and vendors that they make the job easier. They make the job of some of the technical work easier. They build automations that previously you had to hand code. They package up components that mean there's a framework that means that what used to take a few weeks now takes an hour. So there's definitely a level of automation that will happen, and a level of consolidation of technology that just means it becomes a bit easier to do that technical thing. I think what doesn't go away though is all of the, I hate the phrase, but softer skills that are needed. So anything that's around change, leadership, product management, building the right things that serve the business outcomes, all the stuff we've talked about in terms of those leadership skills of the CDO, none of that goes away.
Yeah.
And I think it's the technology part that becomes easier, but it just increases the need for people that are able to think outside technology and deliver what's needed for a business.
It kind of revolves back into one of my favorite topics, which is build versus buy. I think I always encourage organizations I'm talking to, and obviously the one I'm working in now, to think about what your core purpose is.
Yeah.
And, if you haven't got like tons of money to spend on building an engineering function, building a team out, work out what your core purpose is. And if it's about getting to value rather than becoming an engineering house, don't employ a whole bunch of people who are going to sit there and try and recreate something that's available to purchase at pretty cheap cost nowadays. Yeah. But if you think that's where your competitive advantage is, then by all means go for it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, the competitive advantage, and is there value in the IP that you create? Because if there's value in the IP that you create, then it's worth owning the IP,
exactly right.
Or at least having a strong hold on the IP that's created. But if you're doing it to serve the purpose of delivering business outcomes, then don't necessarily build a large engineering function that's starting some things from scratch. And actually, that's back to your sort of previous question. There's some stuff that you had to build a few years back. Attribution modeling you'd build 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, you'd build that yourself. Now there are a bunch of tools on the market that just do it. So the path to value is by using what exists. But if your product is attribution modeling, then of course you build it yourself, because there's some IP in there, and just a bit of a maybe basic example. But so I think it really is important to kind of recognize what kind of business you are and whether there's value in owning that skill, value in building it. But I don't think it's also one or the other. I think you can have a sort of a hybrid of how you get off the ground, how you sustain it, how you accelerate growth. All those things come into it.
Oh, this is one of my favorite phrases as well. Loads of those coming out today. Lab to factory.
Yeah.
What you innovate with and what you experiment with is not necessarily going to be a production-ready capability.
Yeah.
So you have to understand the evolution. When you're starting something, how is this going to go live? I've seen this at work where you build a brilliant model. It's got a really compelling idea behind it, but it's built in a technology stack that can't be supported. Yeah. So your ability to turn that into a production capability is lost. And then the whole innovative concept is kind of wasted.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind, that it has to be scalable.
It does. And actually the thing that you should never give away as an organization is the thinking around the thing. Because if you give away and what I mean by that is obviously you can get some help to sort of move a thought process forward, but if you give away solving the problem, I think that's probably a better way of explaining it. If you give away solving the problem to somebody else and you never sort of keep an eye on it and understand it, then how do you iterate? How do you improve? How do you innovate? How you're tied to whoever it is that you gave the problem to. So I think there's a responsibility for people within an organization to make sure that even if they bring in help to support them to accelerate or give them bandwidth, that they understand why something's being built, what purpose it's going to serve, how it works, what it does, what the end point is, what's the point, how often it needs to be updated, and all those sorts of things. Otherwise, you just end up with a black box solution that you don't understand.
Yeah, people are always terrified by a black box.
Exactly, and then if you start bringing in sort of ethics and that sort of thing, if you don't know what the thing does, how do you explain it to the people that it impacts?
I think when you're audited as an organisation, you have to be able to explain how your models work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's all just hands in the air. I don't know, but the number looks all right.
Yeah.
And you can't. That's not an audit. Obviously. So I think you have to understand how your models work, even if you couldn't construct it from scratch.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the technical ins and outs. You have to understand how it operates in one side out the other.
Yeah.
I think the opposite of black box would be white label. So if you're the first to solve a problem, that could become your new business model.
Yeah.
You're offering that solution as a commodity to the world and to the industry.
Yeah, we get asked actually, how do we monetize this stuff? And they mean externally, and then they're looking for products that they can sell to their customers. And 9 times out of 10, solve the problem internally first, have a thing that fixes your internal process or improves something that will normally be useful to somebody externally. I think that's a much better way. You can test and learn in private, not in public, about what works, and then bring in some friendly externals that you can test the idea on. I think people get a bit sort of like focused on, I need to, externally sell this stuff, but I think internally generating something is a really useful way of doing that.
I like some of the concepts around open source where you start off with the problem solving, but then you give that to the world. The idea being that you always remain the best at using that to your advantage, but you've empowered everybody else to take advantage of something.
This is why I love the Open Data Institute, ODI. That's literally their purpose is help everyone get better at this stuff and create methods and frameworks and education that just mean this gets out there. And we have a similar kind of mindset around our CDO hub. It's like the better data leadership is in the market, the more value the market will get in using data. It's sort of self-fulfilling.
Yeah, and more data roles will become available.
Yeah, exactly.
More people are getting on the merry-go-round.
Yeah, indeed.
Let's move on. So again, let me cast my mind back. So I've done a lot of research on what happened in 2018. I can't remember what was number one at the time that we had our conversation.
2018 was about 20 years ago, wasn't it? It feels like
early days of skiffle,
pre-COVID.
So back in 2018, and I've used this stat loads to justify work that I do. The prevailing wisdom from Gartner was that 85% of big data projects fail, and by 2019. Their view was that through 2022, only 20% of analytics insights will deliver business outcomes, which I guess is still an 80-20 sort of failure rate there. Yeah. So do you think the low strike rate is still true? And if so, how do you think companies can prepare themselves to have the best chance of success when they start their data journey?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know on the low strike rate because I haven't done that research like Gartner have, but anecdotally, people do struggle with that, right? They struggle with turning... And it's sort of what I was talking about earlier, and it's the answer to the how do people fix it, which is it's kind of focusing on building capabilities and then struggling to turn it into anything, or building something where the outcome of what you're trying to achieve isn't clear, and trying to sort of do too much. So the answer of fixing that problem, if indeed that problem exists, is to align everything that you do to a problem that you're trying to solve, and if you work back from the problem you're trying to solve, then at least you're trying to solve a problem, right? And you might not solve it, and it might take longer, and it might be harder, and it might be unsolvable. But at least the thing that the thing you're putting in place, the capability you're building, the platform, the data set that you're putting together, the data management techniques you put in place. At least they're there to try and engender a change in something, and chip away. You don't have to. If we work, as I sometimes call it, sort of right to left instead of left to right. If we work from the problem back to data, rather than go, well, we've got a bunch of data, what can we do with it, and then try and find a problem to solve. That's the kind of number one way I think people can get most value out of it. I mean, I don't know. Predicting future failure rate. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think a more positive way of doing that. Not to bash Gartner too much, is to inform, and I'm sure that comes with that research, is inform, well, what's the way of making that happen, and I think right focus on the right outcomes, putting the right structure and sort of approach together that helps you align to that. But I think that then loops around to sort of, we haven't really touched on this much, but the culture of the business. So culture, when most people talk about culture in data culture, what they mean is a culture of using data to make decisions, but actually culture change is needed in order to do that, which is all around pace of change, how you budget for different projects, the kind of people you bring in, the methodologies that you use, the change imperative, all of that needs a culture change in order to then drive the sort of literacy culture change of using data to make decisions. And that, I think, again, that's just ties into how do we make this thing successful. It's focusing on those really important components of a strategy. Not easy though.
I was going to say, we've got like 30 minutes through without ever mentioning the phrase data strategy, but I think what you've just expressed is actually the alignment of your data strategy to support and drive your business strategy. So you solve a problem that matters to the organization and that people want solved, because it's easy to find problems that can be solved and are fun to solve, but if they don't matter and nobody cares, you're wasting your time. You've got to tie yourself to an organizational outcome that people want to solve and want to sponsor you and pay money to you and your team to be able to solve in the first place.
We've talked about aligning data strategy underpinning a business strategy for a number of years, and I think there's a lot of people now that sort of get and understand that. I think actually that gets a little bit misconstrued, that you have to kind of start with the data strategy and work back. Start with a business strategy and work back. And there are day-to-day challenges, and those day-to-day challenges do need fixing. And day-to-day challenges, if they exist, we need to know whether it's worth solving them. And our business strategy may help us understand that. So I think it's two lenses. There's the what business strategy do we need? Data can play a part in shaping that. There's, are we achieving that business strategy? Data can help you understand that, and performance reporting and those good things. Then there's, what are our operational activities that we need to do to run the business? And there'll be some problems there, either data problems that are causing business problems, or problems that data can solve. So there's a kind of few different lenses. I don't think it's quite as sort of straightforward as saying, right, let's look at the business strategy and find problems. But it has to link. It has to link back to that. We had a client once who was spending vast money on a kind of joint venture data program within their industry, and at the time when they set it up, it was brilliant, great initiative. The organisation, it was like sort of 5 years later, the organisation had moved on, and we looked at the business strategy of that organisation, and it didn't, that function essentially didn't feature. The function it was serving didn't feature. So we asked the question: is your business strategy wrong, and that should be included, or actually have you moved forward and this thing isn't needed? And so sometimes it can get a bit misaligned, which is why I think there's a sort of the data strategy needs to rinse and repeat and improve it all the time and reflect on it and go back to it, because the business changes a lot quite quickly, and sometimes quicker than you think. Even in slow-moving organisations, that happens without you realising. So yeah, alignment to the business strategy, I think, fundamental to a data strategy, but looking at problems that you can solve now as well is equally important.
Yeah, I think I badged myself as a Gen 1 CDO earlier, kind of around this problem. I get very excited about alignment to business strategy, making the business more successful. But it goes back to one of my complaints around consultants coming in and trying to flog AI and various other concepts. That quite often there's moonshots, but most organizations struggle to get the basics of BI right. And I am anti-BI. Let me put that out there. BI looks at the past, and I think it's a hygiene factor, and the data is important. But if you can't give yourself the hygiene factor of knowing how your business is performing, then you can't measure the benefits of investing in the data strategy and going forwards. So, and that's not a business strategy. That's kind of taken as a given in most organizations, but it's just not present.
Yeah. You talked earlier about people not done this yet. I think a lot of that is they don't yet have the kind of basic reporting in place, and basic reporting isn't. I think that's. I think it's sort of that's misconstrued a bit. I think actually looking back is fine. That's help. It helps you reflect, helps you know where you've come from, helps you assess whether you did what you said you were going to do. But if that's all you've got, then of course it doesn't help move forward. But in many people's minds, if I don't have that hygiene factor, then how can I think about more forward-looking, benefit-driving activities than just that hygiene factor of knowing how things went?
Yeah.
So you've got to do both, and certainly in the early stages of a data strategy, I think you need to do both forward-looking, value-adding use cases and metrics. I'll call it that, whether that's dashboards or not, but the metrics that are most important to the business. Because without those, you can't track whether if you pull the handle that the dial moves.
Exactly. So. Yeah, it's easy to build the magic rearview mirror. It's much harder to build the forward-looking thing, but you can't have one without the other.
So exactly.
Let's not go too far on that one. I've got 3 or 4 questions left in our short time slot.
Okay.
And I've got to pick and choose because I can see we haven't got that many minutes left. This is quite a controversial one. So if I'm setting you up for something that's going to cause you trouble, then choose not to answer, take the 5th.
Very good.
There are some proposal documents out at the moment that significantly alter the UK stance on GDPR, which I think we both worked very hard to implement and to work within over the last few years.
Yep.
So these proposals, do they concern you as a data leader? Do you think it frees up innovation and personalized services, and that's going to kickstart the economy? Or do you think it opens up opportunities for you as a business to be able to help people through this? Or what's your thoughts on these proposals?
I suppose I've got 2 things on that. The benefit to an organisation. So if I look at it through the lens of an organisation, the benefit to an organisation of something like GDPR or an evolution of it is to better, more transparently deal with data about their customers or their employees. And that can only be a good thing. So I think to do the right thing by the customer is what this should be about, and do the right thing by the by holding someone's data, you've been given a right, you've got a responsibility to do the right thing by it. So I think an organisation that is forward looking will almost, yes, regulation ensure that they're meeting it, but actually it's more than that. It should be about more than that. So I think the regulators have a tough job here about finding the right balance between ensuring that if I think about a customer, ensuring that the customer is confident that the right thing is being done. And frankly, it's difficult to keep on top of that. How many things you sign up to, and all the interactions you have online and social media. It's hard to kind of keep on top of what the hell's happening here. So for an organisation to do that transparently, I think is good for brand and good for engagement with customers. So on the one hand, you've got the regulators that need to think about that. On the other hand, you go, well, actually, we need to be legal. We need to do the right thing. So I think a softening can be good, but as long as it's not to the detriment of the kind of trade of value that a customer gives by giving their data. So yeah, I need to be seen about whether the changes A, come in, and B, how impactful they can be. But yeah, I just think as long as the focus is on doing the right thing by your stakeholders, customers, shareholders, and getting the balance of commercial and regulation right in a business, I think an organisation will be fine, and that's what we focus on.
I probably broached a really big subject quite late in the
podcast.
Yeah. So maybe that becomes a panel discussion.
Let's do that
at a later date.
Let's
That'd
do
be
that.
more interesting. So I've got two quite snappy ones in the minutes we've got left. So I've seen you publicly attack Ditno from the legendary Clive Humby. Data is the new oil. What's your objection to it, and what do you think it actually is?
Yeah. So Ditno, data is the new oil. My view is data isn't the new oil. Look, I'm a very balanced person. I can always see two sides of an argument, and there are definitely reasons how data can be seen as oil, new oil, and there's lots of reasons why it's so different, and I'm not going to go into that. What I don't like, and why I don't think it should be used, and I think it's not the right metaphor to use for people to try and convince an organisation that this is a good thing, is the connotations that tend to sit around oil about impact on the environment, on sort of a very small number of people making lots of money from it. I just don't like the connotation that it tends to be a negative one. Essentially, oil tends to be quite a negative connotation in people's minds. Therefore, if you use it as the way to try and convince people that data is a good thing in an organisation, I just don't think it works.
I've seen this change recently.
Yeah.
I was using an oil rig slide and Ditno as an intro to a starter deck. And I was pulled up for exactly that reason. It's like, use a wind farm, use something else.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't expect the Climate Association to what is quite a good simile to the way structures have to be built to take advantage of oil, to prey so heavily on people's minds, but it clearly does.
It does, yeah, but that's because of the connotation. It's because it's the perception people have around it. So I just don't think it works. As you say, wind farms, puppies, like something nice.
That's the new puppy.
It's the new puppy, exactly.
It could be the new Kleenex. I've seen those problems.
Yeah. So say no to Ditno. That's the phrase.
So here's the last one. We've got a very short period of time, and this is quite a tricky question. So it's a bit knee jerk, I think. So we've talked there about negative connotations, and I think data gets a really tough time in the general press.
Yep.
Which I don't think is deserved. So how might you change the perception of data? So if data was a celebrity, and assuming you can't send it to, I'm a celebrity in the jungle, to be rehabilitated and loved by the audience, what would you do to redress the negative position around data at the moment?
Oh wow. So wait, am I answering what celebrity would it be, or what would I do? Can I answer? I'm going to answer the easier one, which is
choose your answer.
Yeah, I'm going to answer the easier one, which is what would I do to improve it? Media's media, right? So bad news stories, like to bubble up to the surface. So in some respects, that's just going to happen. But I think making sure that the good stories come out, right? And this is my point earlier. There's so many good things data can do. We can use it to help find new ways to cure cancer. We can use it to help fight climate change. We can save the bees. We can do all these really, really cool things. We can improve cities. We can improve society. So let's talk about those.
Love it.
That's my answer.
We're right at the time limit. I just want to say what a privilege it's been to flip positions, have the opportunity to ask you some questions. You've been really deep washed through the industry in the last 3 to 4 years. You've met so many people, and it's really great to hear your opinions on these things. I think data is a vital capability. It impacts everywhere across every organization. And I think seeing that spark of realization and watching a business come to life through greater insight is the privilege that I have. And you've made that your business. So, congratulations on how well you've done.
I appreciate
hope
that.
it continues.
Yeah, appreciate that. And thanks for putting me in the hot seat. Thanks for hanging out again. I've enjoyed it. And a lot of what I say has been learned through experience in engaging with this great community. So appreciate all your time, Pete. And yeah, maybe Valentine's Day we get to hang out again together.
I'll put the champagne on ice. Thanks, man. Cheers.
Thanks, Pete.